Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and this is the Eve Universe Show. All right, let's start with Theodicy. I don't even know if we're going to get all the way through Theodicy. We're going to be reading it. Let's introduce it real quick. So Theodicy is a rather long story. It's 169 pages, as it is. And it also... So the writer of Theodicy is the same author as the Empyrean Age and Templar 1. So I actually think that Theodicy can, and more importantly should, be viewed as being kind of the first in that trilogy, right? So it goes Theodicy, Empyrean Age, Templar 1, right? Hold on. There we go. So this is actually kind of an important story, but not a lot of people know about it. Everybody kind of knows about the Templar 1, and everybody knows about Empyrean Age and all that kind of stuff, and even like Inheritance. But Theodicy kind of gets left out. So I've been wanting to do this for a while. Nice. This story takes place before... really before even the events of Concord, right? So this is over 100 years ago. All right. A little bit of backstory. The Minmatar have leaders that are known as elders, and the elders are supposedly the original elders, like the progenitors of their different clans, that developed the method called the Talrog form, where that allows them to pass from body to body, kind of like the Intaki, but in a much more like literal way. And these are kind of like the secret leaders of the Minmatar. However, especially during the Amar occupation, they were scattered. And so at this point, there was a couple of elders that were found in a specific station of an Amar facility. We are going to continue Theodicy, Chapter 4. Which test reveals more of the soul? The test that man will take to prove his faith, or the test that finds the man who believed his faith already proven? If you know this answer, then you also know which of these challenges bear the greatest penalty for failure. The gates of paradise will open for you one time only. Woe to the soul who dares to knock twice. Book of Missions, 514, the Scriptures. Throughout history, the militaries of civilizations have created soldiers from the ranks of able-bodied in their society. The Minmatar, having lost most of their able-bodied to death or slavery, tried this approach and found the results unsatisfactory for their own special needs. Instead, they took their most notorious villains, their thieves, schemers, and murderers, and turned them into soldiers. They called these men Valkyrs. Federal Intelligence Office Archives, classified. Document NJ-TAC F22, History of Minmatar Infantry Development. Derelict Region, Agu Constellation, the High Hill System, Demnon Planetesimal, Demnon Mining Complex, Main Hangar Bay. Jumping down from the ramp, Vlad sprinted away from the Rifter's landing skids and moved towards the rock outcrops along the tarmac's edge. Behind him, the other Valkyrs spread outwards in groups of two, seeking cover that would give them a clear line of sight with the immense tunnel leading back outside to the docking vent. Some began darting up the steep rock to face the hangar's walls, quickly nestling into ledges and disappearing into the shadows cast by the floodlights high above them. Vlad found a spot behind some rocks well above the tarmac, across from the hangar seals leading to the complex. The Rifter was resting on the pad with its boarding ramp intentionally left open. The hope was that the Jovians would assume that they had already entered the complex, thus drawing them out from the safety of their own ships and into the crosshairs of the Valkyr rifles. Several clicks in his earpiece indicated that each of the soldiers was in place, waiting for his orders. They were more than 30 kilometers below the surface, yet Vlad could still hear muted rumbles from the crash of meteors high above. To conserve resources, the Amarians were not replenishing any of the air that escaped whenever the outer airlock opened for a ship to enter the hangar. For now, A man could still breathe inside without an aid of a mask, but any exertion would wind him immediately. The next time the seal opened, which it would at any second to allow the Jovian frigates inside, what little air remained would escape. Peering through the scope of his rifle, Vlad scanned the area. The hangar was an enormous cave carved into the Demnon's mantle by Amarian explosives and on the back of Mimitar slaves. 3 sets of stabilizer rigs, spaced about 700 meters apart, were built into both walls, one of each of the Bastora-class industrials that could dock here to unload cargo and haul unprecedented ore back outside. The hangar's dimensions were designed specifically to accommodate this ship. It was impossible for anything larger to get inside. Moving the crosshairs towards the rifter, Vlad noticed bloodstains scattered all over the tarmac. That prison riot must have ended here, he thought, taking note of the different kinds of patterns. There were darkened pools marking the graves where main victims bled to death, the fine mist spray patterns caused by gunshot wounds, the heavier droplet patterns indicating blunt impacts delivered by fists or heavy objects. Without question, this place was a scene of gruesome violence that claimed the lives of dozens of people. A good death for these slaves, Vlad thought, attaching the scope back onto his rifle. To meet death while killing Amarians was the most these people could ask for. A gust of air blew some dust up from the ground as 2 sets of lights pierced the blackness at the end of the tunnel. Vlad spotted Thrumgar, a short distance from him in the ledges, swinging his claw, light assault weapon, over the side and popping it against the stone. He better handle himself well early on, Vlad thought, or else we're just going to become another stain on the tarmac. Time to awaken, Viola. The voice came from one of the faceless souls surrounding her in the barren field. The crypt was just ahead, with the corpse of the unidentified hero waiting inside. A hand from the crowd reached out and touched hers. Terrified, Viola took a step backwards. Open your eyes. Slowly. She turned in the direction that the hand had reached out from, and as she opened her eyes, a face began to take shape on one of the spirits standing beside her. Jet black eyes surrounded by pale white flesh, marred with dark veins that originated from the scalp and branched all the way down to the jawbone. Viola startled, taking a short breath. The creature's hands moved gently over her mouth. Your first encounter with a Jovian, I see. His voice had a synthetic tone to it, with a pitch that was as eerie as it was soothing. A difficult sight for your breed to absorb. It is understandable. Viola realized that she was laying on her back, and the Jovian was standing over her. As she removed his hand, she noticed that his skin did not feel like organic tissue. Glass, she thought. It looks and feels like wet glass. My name is Grius, and I am here to protect you and assist the Mimitars with their mission to rescue the Elders. What the hell, she thought? Protect me? Taking a quick inventory of her body, Viola felt some mild soreness in her chest and legs, but it was her eyes that hurt more than anything else. You were subjected to enormous G-force when your ship lost control, Grius said, helping her off the table. Some of the capillaries in your eyes burst, which explains your appearance. I lacked the equipment needed to repair them here, but I was able to repair numerous ruptures to the muscle linings along your diaphragm, abdominal wall, and blood vessels in your legs. What's wrong with my appearance? Viola asked, getting to her feet slowly. The room was small, but packed with strange equipment that was unlike anything she had ever seen. Grius waved his hand, and a screen materialized from the wall. I know this obsession with your kind has with appearance. Come this way, please. Viola took a few hesitated steps forward. The Jovian was slender and stood less than 180 centimeters tall. His entire body, save for his head and hands, was covered in an armored suit. She began to feel uncomfortable at the sight of those bottomless orbs staring through her. Turning towards the screen, Viola gasped when she saw her reflection, the whiteness of her eyes blood red. They will heal with time, and your vision should remain unaffected, Grius said, taking her gently by the hand once more. You have the pilot of this ship to thank for saving your life. I'm on a ship? She asked herself, resisting the urge to pull her hand away. You mean you're not the pilot? Viola asked, running her fingers along her eyelids. No, but he is listening, Grius said as several doors slid open in front of them. You can speak to him, if you wish. By the way, by this point in time in the history, I don't believe that the Jove have given the capsule to the Caldari. So most of the Empire denizens have never actually seen a capsule before. This is crazy, she thought, looking up at looking up towards the hallway lights. Thank you? A voice just as eerie as Grius resonated through the hall, and door behind them closed. You are welcome, Viola. May I speak with him directly? She asked. I feel like I should express my gratitude in person. Another door opened, leading to the cabin with higher ceilings than the hallway. The room was illuminated with red lights, and the metallic walls were covered with ominous markings and electronics. Not here, I'm afraid, Grius said, tightening his grip slightly. Step where I step, Viola. This chamber is different from the others. The back of her neck began to tingle as something caught her eyes. The walls, she realized, were distorted. Either I'm still high, she thought, or I swear we're not the only people in here. The pilot's voice echoed through the cabin. Prepare to disembark. Grius handed her a mouthpiece with 2 small cylinders attached to the side. Put this in your mouth and breathe through it. Avoid taking in air through your nose for the time being. Speak through it as you would normally would. It will stay in place unless you use your hands to remove it. Where are we? Viola asked, dreading the answer. A seal of light appeared at the end of the cabin, growing wider until a grayish-brown surface, a landing pad, was clearly visible. Grius led her towards it as she put the mouthpiece in. Demnon, he said, stepping onto the surface. Inside the Amarian mining complex. Wait, what? Viola hesitated, but then was gently pulled towards the tarmac by Grius. I was just on a goddamn wraith, she thought, recognizing the distinct hull shape above her as she was herded down the boarding ramp. No one has ever been this close before, let alone inside one. 200 meters in front of them was the Mimitar Rifter, also resting on the tarmac. Viola noticed immediately that its boarding ramp was lowered as well, but did not see anyone else nearby. She sensed that the air was thin and took several deep breaths to become adjusted to the mouthpiece. You don't need one of these to breathe? You don't need one of these to breathe? She asked. Grius was staring at the rocky cavern far from the Mimitar ship, his head tilted slightly from one side. Our anatomy differs from yours in more ways than just appearance, he answers. Come with me. I have something to show you. As they walked towards the boarding ramp section of the frigate's hull, Viola saw the remains of the Atron about 100 meters away. The aft segment of the ship was gone, and the rest of the hull was blackened. Some sections of armor plating were missing. Others hung from the crippled ship by a few strands of twisted metal. The only part of the battered frigate that appeared intact was the bubble canopy. How the hell did I survive that? Viola's voice was enhanced through the speaker of the mouthpiece. Grius was leading her along the length of the wraith, away from the rifter, and towards the direction of the tunnel. She suddenly felt a sharp longing for one of her painkillers. The odds of surviving a direct hit from a tachyon beam in that ship is exactly 0, he answered. Viola could see the fuselage of the second wraith a few meters ahead. You survived because the Amarian gunners were inaccurate. The Amarians took a shot at me? Viola remembered the Imperial Navy battle fleet that showed up right after. I didn't kill those people, Viola blurted, recalling some gruesome visage of the corpses floating in the debris of the bestower. My ship wasn't even armed. We know you did not, Grius interrupted, but it was to make it look that way by design. The Order, Viola thought. But do the Jovians know? She stopped dead in her tracks as the second wraith came into full view. Like the one that she had emerged from, its boarding ramp was also open, but lying at its base was a full-grown man, bound with his hands behind his back. His head and shoulders were covered in cloth. He was resting on his knees. Grius, who is... He has not been harmed, Grius said, ushering her forward. Tell me, what do you call them? The cryptic ones who lured you to this place. Viola paused. The Order. I'm not even sure what they call themselves. We have been pursuing them for some time, Grius said. They are elusive and extremely dangerous. Is there anything more you wish to tell me about them? The question sent a chill up Viola's spine. That was a command, not a question. There's nothing more to tell, she answered, looking towards the captive. He seemed unaware that they were standing so close to him. They first contacted me years ago, giving me perfect information about Amarian movements and operations in Mimitar space. Viola heard a distant rumble that sounded vaguely like thunder. Ever since then, they would only contact me randomly, which leads to with leads that were priceless. Priceless for whom? Grius was facing her directly, staring with the soulless black eyes. For the Mimitar, she answered nervously. He already knows the answers to these questions. I passed along everything I felt could help them to avoid this reclaiming debacle. Grius turned towards the rifter again as more rumbles echoed through the hangar. The man kneeling beside you is the one who gave the order to destroy your ship. Would you like to know his name? Viola was caught off guard by the question. I'm sorry? Commodore Foss Akridon of the Imperial Navy, Grius said. I imagine that you know much of him. What? Viola explained, whirling around towards the hooded prisoner. That's impossible! How could... The elders are also here. Somewhere in the catacombs below. And hidden in those rocks are the Mimitar soldiers sent to rescue them. Grius paused. As we speak, they have their weapons trained on us and are waiting for the right chance to kill us both. The blood left Viola's face. Kill us? Do not fear, Grius said, clasping his hands behind his back. At no point since arriving in my care have you been in any danger. But shouldn't we get back inside the ship? Viola asked, taking a shallow breath through the mouthpiece. Someone needs to tell them that we're trying to help. That is the plan, Grius answered. But it'll take more than negotiation skill to convince them of our good intentions. Viola looked towards the rocks. There was absolutely nothing obstructing her line of sight with the rifter or the massive cavern walls surrounding them. Well, then who's going to do it? You? Viola, Grius said, again turning his black eyes towards her. You and I were not alone when we left the ship. Vlad had heard a series of clicks in his earpiece, each of them a separate request to open fire. The Jovians and woman were standing out in the open, talking casually and seeming oblivious to the dangers surrounding them. But who the hell is that prisoner? Vlad wondered, clicking back an order for the soldiers to wait. Just a few minutes earlier, the two Jovians had descended the boarding ramp of the second Wraith, deposited a prisoner on the surface, and then walked back up. There has to be more of them, he thought, moving the scope's crosshairs back towards the first Wraith. Patience is key, but we have to get inside the complex soon. As the crosshairs moved across the boarding ramp, Vlad saw something dart across the viewfinder that made him flinch. Looking off the scope towards the tarmac, he saw 4 separate distortions that reminded him of roiled air over hot surface. Danger, Vlad sensed, as Thrumgar's claw fired several rounds that kicked up debris from the surface below. The earpiece erupted with shouts as Vlad snapped his rifle towards Thrumgar's position. What the fuck is he shooting at? Kurgan demanded. There's something coming right towards me, Thrumgar screamed, putting the claw into full automatic and spraying rounds wildly in front of him. Vlad spanned his rifle left and right, desperately seeking a target but finding none. More machine gun bursts illuminated the cavern wall as the other soldiers shouted and fired their silenced weapons into the shadow. Just as Vlad took a breath to speak, he saw Thrumgar's claw inexplicably throw itself from its hands. The giant man appeared to freeze for a moment, then drop, gently, as if hands were guiding him, face down on the ground. Then Vlad felt it. A draft of air on the back of his neck that shouldn't have been there, and reacted solely on instinct. In one fluid motion, he thrust the rifle backwards as hard as he could and felt the stock slam into a man. Ignoring the strange-sounding grunt, Vlad whirled 180 degrees to his left, unsheathing the kritak in mid-spin with his right hand and exploding forward in a lunge. There was nothing in front of him that the eyes could see, but Vlad's senses told him otherwise. His left forearm caught something heavy on its way up to block an invisible counterstrike, but his right hand, clenching the knife tightly and keeping the blade parallel to the ground, continued unobstructed in a wide arc until it punctured something thick, right where a man's rib cage would be. An ear-piercing howl filled the cavern as a Jovian soldier materialized at the hilt of the knife. Just as Vlad commanded his wrist to twist the blade, he felt something strike his lower back, and then all of the muscles in his body went numb. Panic overwhelmed him as he fell backwards, completely paralyzed. He did not feel himself hit the ground, but saw the silhouette of a second Jovian standing over him a moment later. Domain region. Throne World Constellation. The Amar System. Planet Oris. Emperor Family Academy Station. St. Kurea, the Prophet Cathedral. Grand Admiral Mekioth Sorum moved past the royal guards and entered the great cathedral. Its vaulted ceilings stood more than 50 meters high, supported by dozens of massively columned, lavishly carved with dozens of massive columns lavishly carved with scenes depicted from the scriptures. Seated at the center of the cathedral was Emperor Hadrian, adorned with religious pageantry and affixed permanently to his throne. Numerous cybernetic devices were visible on his head, neck, and shoulders, all of which were required to keep him alive. More than 4 centuries old, and he still lives, Mekioth thought, approaching the altar. With any luck at all, Amar will not have to suffer under his incompetence of his rule much longer. My lord, Mekioth said, kneeling before Hadrian and bowing his head as hooded priests looked on. Arise, Grand Admiral, Hadrian said, motioning with his ancient hand. The priests moved silently towards the antechamber at each corner of the floor. You summoned me? Mekioth said, standing slowly. Hadrian's voice was old, but steady as he spoke. I have heard terrible news about the Impervious, Mekioth. Why was he sent to that dreadful place? Mekioth took a deep breath before speaking. My lord, surely you know of the disappearance of our apostle Taj Rukan and his disciples? Of course, Hadrian answered. Have you found them? I loathe bringing you such bad news, but they are dead, Mekioth replied, feigning dismayed. Commodore Archiridon received a distress signal from their ship and set out immediately to rescue them. Ah, Foss, Hadrian breathed. Tell me what his role in this. Tell me what his role was in this. He followed the signal to Demnon, where he witnessed the murder firsthand. What? Hadrian nearly coughed. Who dared to do this? The rebels? The act is inconceivable, my lord, but the savagery was committed by the Gallente Federation. Hadrian paused, his eyes widened in shock. You have proof of this? We have footage taken from the Impervious, Mekioth said, disciplining himself to convey shock and anger. It clearly shows a Federation frigate in attack position, just as the Apostles' Bestower exploded. Moments later, Mimitar rebels appeared, and their so-called Valkyr fleet, escorted by Jovian ships. Jovians? Hadrian's throne detached from the locking braces and floated down from the altar. You are certain of this? Yes, my lord. The Impervious successfully attacked the Gallente ship, but the Jovians intervened and prevented its outright destruction. I ordered Commodore Acrodon to retreat immediately, but he... He what, Admiral? Tell me! Mekioth looked downward. He insisted on recovering the bodies of the priests, saying that they deserved a proper burial in preparation for their passage to heaven. He was hopelessly outnumbered, and the Quzxpon storm was upon him. No, Hadrian said. Don't tell me. My lord, the Impervious was destroyed, along with her escorts. We cannot launch a search and rescue mission until the storm passes. Hadrian was devastated. Faust, my son. We have not abandoned all hope, but given the violent nature of the storm and the numbers of rebel ships involved, it seems unlikely that... Mekioth did not have to finish the sentence. Emperor Hadrian wept, taking shallow breaths and convulsing intermittently with wheezes. There were no tears, as his ancient body was no longer capable of producing them. My lord, I am sorry. He was a hero of Amar, and the best captain I have ever known. We must avenge his death. What do you think must be done? We are hunting the rebel fleet as we speak. The High system is quarantined, but I must ask your permission to fire upon any Gallente or Jovian ships that we encounter around Demnon. Emperor Hadrian flinched. I object to that. The Gallente could have been a rogue. We must not haste My lord, the Federation is engaged in a full-scale war with the Caldari state that they are winning. This act, rogue or not, is in itself an act of war, and your subjects will demand action. We cannot afford to tolerate such aggressions within our borders. The throne turned away from Mekioth and faced the great statue of Prophet Korea, surrounded by angels in depiction of paradise. And what of the Jovians? How do you propose we deal with them? I am preparing a battle plan, and once I determine the full extent of Jovian involvement with this massacre, I shall make them known to you. Emperor Hadrian turned to face Mekioth again, looking him over slowly. Very well, Grand Admiral. You have permission to fire upon Gallente's ships, but only in the immediate vicinity of Demnon, and only against any ships that attempt to run your blockades. Mekioth bowed his head. Thank you, my lord. I will not rest until the murderers are brought to justice. Find him, Mekioth, Hadrian whispered. Bring his body back to me. I will do everything I can, my lord. They bounded down the cavern walls, effortlessly carrying the incapacitated Minmatar commandos across the tarmac and setting them on their knees at the base of the first wraith. Viola stared in amazement at the pure strength and conditioning of these Jovians. She still could not bring herself to call them men, as they were made trip after trip to recover the bodies. In little more than a few minutes since the first shots were fired, there were now 8 Minmatar commandos bound shoulder to shoulder, hands behind their backs and kneeling directly across from the Amarian captive. Graeus disappeared into the with the wounded Jovian into the wraith. Viola stared at the captives, all of which were slowly regaining sensation in their limbs. Valkyries, Viola thought, looking over their faces and studying their appearance. Overly muscular, no identification or rank insignia, tribal markings strewn across their arms, neck, and face. Minmatar's best soldiers, each of them converted psychopath or murderer. The only woman among them was the pilot, several years younger than herself, with dark hair, light-colored eyes, sharp features, and just as physically robust as the others. She was breathing through a device provided by Graeus, as was the other soldiers in flight suits. They were still wearing their own masks. Oh, as was one other soldier in flight suits. The rest were still wearing their own masks. What happened to your eyes? The deep voice startled her. The strongest of the group, the one who had somehow managed to stab a cloaked Jovian, was staring at her. They were injured when my ship was shot down, Viola said, turning to face the Valkyr. Even kneeling, his head was level with her chin. This man was enormous. The Jovians saved my life, and yours as well. The man grunted. So you were the pilot of the Acheron, he says, raising himself more upright. It seems we share a common enemy. What's your name, Gallente? Viola looked over the man before answering. Viola Antiones. And I'm with the Federal Intelligence Office. Do you have... I know that name, he said, lowering his eyes. Other Valkyrs were beginning to squirm against the restraints. You're the one they call Jarua Kiltra. Viola's eyes opened a little wider. She understood the translation well. Seer of Horrors, she breathed. The soldier appeared surprised. You speak our language, he said. What they say of you is true, then. Va nakir kra tua chinak? She asked. What is your name, Valkyr? The man paused, and the slightest beginnings of a smile formed on his lips. You can call me Vlad. We are all in your debt. Then it is time to go on the offensive. I've spent my entire life trying to help your race, Viola said, raising her voice slightly, and yet you were prepared to kill me just a few minutes ago. Why? Some of the soldiers looked towards Vlad. I did not know who you were, and was unsure of your intentions. I know about the elders, Viola snapped back, suddenly feeling another sharp pang for drugs. All of the soldiers fixed their stares onto her, as do the Jovians. There is no secret to us how important they are to you. We are all here for the same reason, to help you to get them out. The pilot of the Rifter spoke up. We don't need your help. Just release us and leave this place. Ziara, Vlad shouted, glaring at the pilot. She shot a glare back, then slumped back down and turned her frown towards Viola. Please forgive her tenacity, he said, lowering his voice. She should not make that tone with you. But with all due respect, we prefer to go alone from here. Such a proud race, Grius said, emerging from the wraith. He was holding Vlad's Kritak, and 3 of the 4 original Jovian soldiers who had subdued the Valkyrs flanked him as he walked. I see now why the elders are so crucial to the survival of your kind. We're here because of what happened to Iana, Viola said, looking towards the hooded Amarian. Best to keep his identity quiet for now, she thought, even though I'd love to leave him here alone with the Valkyrs for a few minutes. This is the endgame for the Mimitar, and the elders were on the brink of uniting all of the tribes of the Republic. You need them now more than ever, so stop being so goddamn stubborn and let us help you. Viola, a word with you in private, please, Grius said, motioning for her to walk up the ramp. Puzzled at her own outburst, she complied, leaving the surprised Valkyrs to themselves. I need a fucking pill right now, she thought, contemplating asking the Joves for something, anything, to satisfy the need. Grius peered into her eyes as he spoke. You are addicted to painkillers, he said matter-of-factly. Are you even aware that your hands are shaking? Viola looked at her hands. A visible tremor was running through both of them. The Serpentis lace their drugs with chemicals designed to enhance addictive properties, Grius said. Typically, withdrawal symptoms for someone with your physical characteristics would not begin for several hours at least. But in your case, with your repeated ingestion due to habit, they have begun already. Well, shit. Look, we don't have time for this. But if you happen to have any more pills... We do not, Viola. You are already at the threshold level of drugs I can safely administer to treat your pain without risking incapacitation. We cannot detoxify your bloodstream here. So what are my options? She said. You are a liability now, and you will continue to display increasing agitation until you reach psychosis, assuming the high blood pressure and heightened body temperature do not cripple you first. Then leave me with Acridon, Viola answered. I want to have a few words with him. Grius tilted his head to one side. What do you expect to gain from doing so? You are not trained interrogator, and he will only repeat his name, rank, and prayers when addressed. Viola looked behind her at the slumped figure under the cloth and could see that the Valkyrs were becoming impatient. I can't explain why, she said, rubbing her forehead. I just want to get inside the mind of this zealot to try to understand the thinking that goes into the decision to bombard a planet. The Jovian stared at her for a moment, thinking about what she said. So, this too is also by their design. The ones you call the Order. A confluence of events orchestrated to produce an outcome desirable to them. He paused for a moment to look down the ramp towards Acridon. No coincidence at all that we are permitted to save him. He has a role in this scheme. And do you, apparently. Grius, what are you talking about? Viola asked, craving a soothing rush of painkiller. This is about the elders, about helping the Mimitar. Everything the Order has ever given me was intended to help them. Only because it suits their interests to do so, Grius said, starting down the ramp. At least for now. What do you mean? Viola asked. The Order is threatened by the Amar Empire? Grius stopped. The Order, we call them Edheduani, do not fight their own wars. They have the Empire's fight for them, which they achieve by controlling influence of those who rise to power. But the Mimitars were not supposed to collapse so quickly, and it appears that they have also underestimated the impact of the Amarian religion on society. So now they have successfully involved us to reset the balance that is most favorable to them. Viola became angered. So sympathy for the Mimitar has nothing to do with your involvement here at all? The Edheduani are our greatest enemy. That makes them your greatest enemy as well. We cannot sit idly while they selfishly interfere with the history that is yours to decide, no matter how destructive or how often you wish to repeat it. Grius and his 3 companions walked down the ramp as Viola glared at their backs, trying to ignore the tremors jostling in her hands. Use the word yours, she thought. He sees no distinction at all between any of the other races, except for his own. Hey, Grius, Viola called. The 4 Jovians stopped and turned. What does it Hedyuani mean? The Jovians thought for a moment. There is no translation in your language. For you are a merciful God, the sole devotion of my life, true to the most faithful servants in their time of need. Amen. Voss completed the prayer for the 100th time and listened once more for the answers from above. Hearing none, he started to recite the prayer again and again, and then stopped as the images of Iana seared through his concentration. He shut his eyes, opening them again to the black shroud over his face, and still could not shake himself free of the torment assaulting his soul. This punishment must be deserved, Faust realized, arcing his back and trying to dismiss the pain radiating from his knees. The loss of my ship, my crew, becoming a captive of the monster Jovian, all of it, rightful punishment for... He could speak of nothing else to warrant this destiny, except for not believing enough in the Grand Admiral Mechioth Sorum's orders to bombard the planet Iana. His actions merely reflected the wishes of Emperor Hadrian, and thus the will of God. Those sinners deserve their fate, and I have no right to question it. The scriptures warn every paladin of this test, that it always comes when the faithful least expects it. My faith will be rewarded, he thought, searching for inner spiritual strength and finding it. For this is a test that I shall not fail. The cloth covering his head was suddenly removed, and the sight before his eyes made him cry in horror. Mimitar rebels, 8 of them, were standing just a few meters away. In the blink of an eye, one of them unsheathed his knife and hurled towards him. It was deflected by a bright flash, repelled at the last moment by a protective energy field. The man broke free of his comrades' attempts to restrain him, and onward he charged, banging his massive fists against the bubble of energy and screaming. Faust could not hear him, nor could he hear anything else. He simply stared back at his attacker, mesmerized by the hatred radiating from him. Who could blame him? Faust thought, cursing himself for allowing the thought to enter his mind. He watched as they argued amongst each other, and then as they pleaded with a slender Jovian who walked to them, the same one who had taken him from the escape pod and rendered him unconscious. This is what you didn't see from space, Faust thought, trying to read their expressions. You just cannot expect these people to believe in a god capable of inciting such profound hatred in men. You just cannot escape these people to believe. No, you can't just expect these people to believe in a god capable of inciting such profound hatred in men. Again, Faust cursed himself. Did he just think that out loud? He closed his eyes, trying to shut the rebels out of his mind. But instead, finding inner peace, he found the images of incinerated cities bellowing out thick black smoke of burning flesh and bone. I must not lose my faith, for this is a test. Faust commanded himself to remain calm, taking comfort in the shield surrounding him. He watched as his captor handed one of the rebels a strange-looking knife, which he accepted and sheathed immediately. 3 Jovian soldiers approached and began distributing weapons to the Mimitar. Words were exchanged within the group, but then they shifted their attention towards something directly behind them. Something nodded their head approvingly. Some nodded their head approvingly. Others shook them in disbelief. 6 of the rebels, now heavily armed with wearing protective armor, ran off to follow the lead of the Jovian soldiers. The other 2 rebels, pilots by the look of it, glared at him one last time before running towards their ship. He watched as the blast doors in the distance slowly opened, and then as the group of rebels filed inside one by one. The Jovian captor remained behind, standing with his hands clasped behind his back and staring with those otherworldly black orbs. The pleasing figure of a female walked out, desperately soothing to his eyes at first, but again he forcibly dismissed the thought as another secular distraction. The 2 spoke briefly, and then the female turned. Faust noted that she was holding something in her hand, and was overwhelmed with the horror once he recognized what it was. My God, why have you forsaken me? Faust gasped as the woman, with her angelic face and demonic eyes, approached and kneeled so close that he could feel her warm breath. Suddenly his ears felt though as stone was rolled from them, and he could hear once more. Commodore Acridon, the woman said, placing the glaive collar around his neck and switching it on, the points of 6 needles pressed lightly into his skin. It's time we discussed your sin. Until then, I've been Ashtarothi. I've been playing this game since 2010, talking about it since 2012, and I'm here to put Eve into context for you, my fellow Empyreans. Thank you all so much for coming and hanging out. A lot of people would suspect that not a lot of people would want to sit here and go through all of this lore, but I think that together we're proving them wrong. So thank you guys for your support, your views, your likes, your shares, your comments. It means so much, both to me, the channel, and all of the people whose lives are touched by my work, by helping make EVE a better place, by increasing player literacy of EVE Online, because that's the whole point. That's what we're all here for. So, without further ado, I've been Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden, and I'll see you in space.